The first heavy snow of November descended upon Rutland, Vermont, burying the small, aging farmhouse in a thick, insulating blanket of white. It was the kind of snow that didn't just fall, it clung, muffling the already quiet world into an unnerving silence. Inside the modest wood-paneled kitchen, Detective Marcus Thorne, a man whose face had grown as rugged and worn as the Green Mountains themselves, gripped a mug of coffee, its steam barely warming his chilled hands. He wasn't meant to be here. Not anymore. After 20 years on the Boston Homicide Unit, Thorne had sought the quiet of rural life, trading sirens for the rustle of pine trees. But the quiet had shattered 6 months ago. And now, the frigid air of this Vermont morning seemed to hold the breath of a secret too terrible to voice. Across the chipped formica table sat Elias Vance, a local social worker with perpetually tired eyes. They were discussing Ilara. "The state psychiatrist is firm, Marcus," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "They've done every test. No physical trauma, no neurological damage. She is, by all medical accounts, fine." He paused, pushing a stray lock of grey hair from his forehead. "But she hasn't uttered a single word since. Since the night 6 months prior, a warm night in May, an anomaly for Vermont, when 5-year-old Ilara Vance was found huddled under her bed in a neighboring cabin. Found after her parents, Arthur and Claire Vance, no relation to Elias, were discovered brutally murdered in their living room. A robbery gone wrong, the initial report claimed. No, a crime of passion, the second theory suggested. The case had been closed, the official ruling, unsolved home invasion. Thorne took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter taste grounding him. Unsolved Elias? Or abandoned? Elias flinched. The sheriff's department did what they could. They didn't have the resources. You know that. But she... Ilara is the only witness. She saw something." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Every morning I try to talk to her. I show her pictures. I ask her to draw, and every morning I'm met with that same silent stare." Thorne remembered the stare. An abyss of fear and detachment locked behind large, clear blue eyes. He'd interviewed Ilara on that first night, his heart heavy, offering her a crayon, a juice box, anything to break the emotional seal. Nothing worked. The detective rose, walking to the frost-covered window. The snow was a curse, erasing the landscape, and in a terrifying parallel, erasing the crime scene's memory. But beneath the snow, something else lingered, the unresolved feeling of wrongness. The initial police report mentioned a single specific detail that had haunted Thorne since he read the file a week ago. The front door was unlocked, but the only item missing was a leather-bound family photo album. Nothing valuable, no electronics, just an old book of pictures. "I need to talk to the original responding officer again," Thorne stated, turning back to Elias. "And I need to see the cabin, today, before this snow gets any worse. I need to walk the scene, look for the details they missed while they were focused on blood spatter and fingerprints." Elias sighed, pulling on his heavy, worn parka. "It's on the edge of the Pine Ridge National Forest. Remote. The drive alone will take an hour. The local deputy will meet us there." As they stepped out into the biting cold, the crunch of their boots on the pristine snow was painfully loud, violating the silence of the morning. Thorne looked back at his own house, then to the imposing dark line of the woods beyond. He wasn't just investigating a closed case, he was trying to pierce a wall of psychological silence erected by a 5-year-old girl. The cabin stood sentinel, a dark, squat structure almost swallowed by the dense pines. It was a rental, used for summer retreats, and the isolation felt absolute. A rookie deputy, barely out of the academy, was already there, fiddling with the heavy-duty padlock on the front door. Inside, the air was still, frozen in time. The furniture was covered in white sheets, but the outline of the tragedy was starkly visible. A large dark stain on the wooden floor where the carpet had been removed, and a deep gouge in the plaster near the fireplace. The scent of dust and stale wood was overwhelming. Thorne walked slowly, methodically. He didn't look at the stain. He looked at the details. The small, decorative elephant figurine placed perfectly on the mantelpiece, untouched. The half-finished crossword puzzle on a side table, a pair of adult reading glasses resting on the arm of a sofa. Life had stopped mid-sentence. The report said the family photo album was the only thing taken, Thorne murmured, kneeling by an empty bookshelf. That doesn't fit a robbery. It doesn't fit a quick panicked exit. It suggests intent. The deputy cleared his throat nervously. Sir, the initial theory was that the killer might have been looking for something specific, maybe proof of infidelity in the pictures or financial records hidden inside it. Thorne shook his head. If you're looking for financial records, you take the computer or the lockbox, not the family pictures. The photo album was taken to erase a memory, not to steal money. He stood up, his eyes scanning the walls, then the ceiling. He moved into the hallway, noting the heavy wooden door leading to the main bedroom. He stopped at the entrance to a smaller room, Ilara's room. It was small, painted a cheerful yellow, a tiny cot, a shelf of colorful picture books. He went to the cot, then lowered himself to the ground and looked underneath, just as Ilara must have done. He pulled out a small red-checkered stuffed bunny. It was old, one ear floppy, and it smelled faintly of baby powder. As he ran his thumb across its plastic eye, he noticed something. Embedded deep within the matted fur near the bunny's chin was a tiny, almost invisible splinter of dark wood. It wasn't the color of the cabin's light pine floor. It was a darker, richer wood, like mahogany or dark cherry. Thorne's heart began to beat a little faster. He pulled a small evidence bag from his pocket and carefully nudged the splinter inside. Why would a dark wood splinter be under the bed in a pine cabin, caught in a child's toy? The logical progression of the original investigation had missed this. The splinter implied a second location, a different type of furniture, or perhaps a second perpetrator. This was the first small crack in the wall of silence surrounding the Vance murders. Thorne zipped the bag shut, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet room. The silence of the Vermont winter was overwhelming, but now it felt less like peace and more like a warning. He turned to the deputy. I need you to run a full analysis on this splinter. And I need the original police sketches of the crime scene and the victim's clothing. Everything. As they left the cabin, the sun had disappeared behind the clouds, casting the forest into an early, deep gloom. Thorne realized he wasn't just chasing a killer. He was navigating the fractured psyche of a child who had seen the ultimate horror. The mystery wasn't just who did it, but what they did to make a 5-year-old girl choose silence over survival. Don't let the mystery end here. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the next chapter, where Detective Thorne discovers a hidden meaning in one of Ilara's drawings. The tiny splinter of dark wood, no larger than a grain of rice, became Detective Thorne's obsession. He drove straight from the remote cabin to the Rutland Police Forensics Lab, a small operation housed in the back of the station, arguing his way past a tired-looking sergeant who remembered him from the Boston days. It's not evidence, Marcus. The sergeant, a man named Roy, grumbled, chewing on the end of a cold cigar. The case is closed. Don't waste the tech's time. It's the first piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit, Thorne countered, placing the sealed plastic bag on the sterile counter. This cabin is pine. This is cherry or mahogany. It's foreign material. It means the killer or the album came from a different location, a different house. The forensics technician, a young woman named Dr. Lena Sharma, had a sharper eye. She took the bag, her expression serious. A grain of wood could tell us a lot. We can analyze the cell structure, maybe even trace the finish. While Lena went to work, Thorne retreated to the dusty records room, pulling the original case files. He found the police sketches of the interior. The focus was, predictably, on the living room where the Vances died. But Thorne focused on the periphery, the small details documented by the sketch artist but ignored by the investigators. One sketch of the master bedroom caught his attention. It showed a large, beautifully carved, dark wood headboard, a sleigh bed, out of place in the simple rental cabin. A small detail at the corner of the headboard was annotated. Small scuff, possibly recent. Thorne felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The dark wood splinter, the expensive headboard. Was this the source? But if the killer was simply an intruder, why the scuff in the bedroom and the missing album from the living room? And why did Ilara's bunny have the splinter? He drove back to Elias Vance's house, a classic white colonial in a quieter neighborhood near the edge of town. The snow had stopped, leaving the world a blinding white. He found Elias in the sunroom, attempting to coax Ilara into coloring. Ilara sat at a child-sized table, her concentration fixed on a single piece of white construction paper. She was using a black crayon, pressing hard. Thorne watched for a long minute. She wasn't coloring a scene, she was drawing a single, large, irregular black shape. "Is that a monster, Ilara?" Elias asked gently, his voice soft. Ilara didn't look up. Her silence was a palpable force, heavy and resistant. Thorne walked over and knelt beside the table, putting himself at her eye level. He didn't ask her about the murder, he asked about the album. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your mom and dad had a special book of pictures, a brown one. Do you remember it?" Her hand, which had been moving the crayon in slow, deliberate strokes, froze. Her clear blue eyes flickered up, meeting his. The sudden, brief eye contact was like a bolt of lightning. She held his gaze for a second, then quickly dropped her head, her thin brown hair falling forward. The black shape on the paper was now complete, a jagged, almost rectangular outline. "Did someone take the book, Ilara?" Thorne pressed, maintaining the gentle tone. "Did they take the book first?" Her little hand moved again, but not to color. She took the black crayon and drew a single, thick black line diagonally across the black shape. It looked like a tear, or a slash. Thorne looked at the drawing. A black, book-like shape, slashed. "It was broken," he murmured. "They didn't just take it, they broke it." Suddenly, Ilara grabbed a red crayon. She began to scribble violently on the paper, covering the slash, covering the black shape, until the whole center was a chaotic, angry mass of red. Elias gasped softly. "She's never used the red before, only black and blue." Thorne felt his heart sink, but he maintained his calm exterior. He reached out slowly, touching her hand, stopping the frantic scribbling. "It's okay, Ilara. We'll find it. We'll find the book." He looked at the drawing again. The black rectangle, the red violence, and the way her eyes had flashed with fear when he mentioned the book. The photo album was the key. It wasn't just a trophy, it was a source of conflict, a piece of evidence the killer couldn't risk leaving behind. And the dark wood splinter was the trail of where the killer might have gone after the murder. Thorne left Elias's house, his mind racing. He called Dr. Sharma at the lab. "Lena, did you get anything back on that splinter?" "Yes, detective. It's a precise match, Peruvian mahogany, finished with a high-end organic beeswax. Very expensive. We also found trace fibers, tiny fragments of silk dyed an unusual shade of deep purple. Not common material for this area. Peruvian mahogany and deep purple silk. The signs of wealth and a sophisticated operation, completely at odds with the home invasion theory." He was no longer looking for a desperate local criminal. He was looking for someone who could afford expensive furniture, someone who traveled, or someone who worked for the wealthy. He remembered the scuff on the dark wood headboard in the cabin. He needed to find out who owned that cabin, who used the dark wood furniture, and who had a reason to erase the memories inside a family photo album. The first logical step, trace the property. The second, more dangerous step, find the purple silk. The mystery was deepening, pulling Thorne back into the dangerous currents he thought he'd left behind in Boston. The silence of the Vermont winter was no longer peaceful. It was pregnant with a growing, cold terror. Detective Thorne spent the next 48 hours buried in the arcane world of Vermont property records and corporate ownership shells. The cabin, nestled in the woods near the Pine Ridge National Forest, was not owned by the murdered Vances. They were renters. The official owner was a limited liability company, Green Mountain Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware. A common shield for wealthy individuals seeking anonymity. He sat in the Spartan office the sheriff's department grudgingly provided him, the stale air thick with the smell of old paper. His contact in Boston, a cynical but brilliant financial crimes analyst named Agent Miller, was running the LLC trace. "Marcus, you owe me a vacation in Tahiti for this," Miller's voice crackled over the phone. "But here it is. Green Mountain Holdings is a shell, but the principal beneficiary is a holding trust in the Caymans. Digging deeper, follow the money, right? It leads back to a man named Silas Holt." Thorne scribbled the name down. Silas Holt. Who is he? Silas Holt is a major player in Northeast real estate development, billionaire status, clean public profile, but his methods are aggressive. He owns properties all over Vermont, big estate near Stowe, art collector, philanthropist. He also has a reputation for being fiercely private, almost paranoid. And the Vance cabin? That specific property was purchased by Holt's Trust 6 years ago. It's a holding property, Marcus, used occasionally, usually by high-level business associates or sometimes his family. It's not listed for commercial rental. This information created a major structural conflict with the initial home invasion theory. Arthur and Claire Vance were teachers, living a modest life. Why would Silas Holt's Trust, a vehicle for a billionaire, rent a remote, valuable asset to them? Thorne called Lena Sharma at the forensics lab. "Lena, I have a name, Silas Holt. I need you to do 2 things. First, look for any public records, photos, anything linking Holt's properties, specifically his main estate, to Peruvian mahogany and high-end furniture. Second, that silk fiber. Can you trace the dye batch or the textile mill? It's purple, expensive." Lena was efficient. Within an hour, she sent Thorne a link, a feature from an architectural magazine showcasing Silas Holt's primary estate outside Stowe. The photos were stunning. Towering cherry-wood bookcases, dark mahogany dining tables, and in the background of one photo, a luxurious study featuring a large, dark cherry-wood desk. The description explicitly mentioned the wood, hand-finished Peruvian mahogany. The dark wood splinter was almost certainly from Holt's world. The second piece of information was more difficult. The purple silk fiber, while high quality, was a custom dye lot used exclusively by a single, ultra-luxury European fashion house. It wasn't mass market. Thorne's mind immediately went to the victims, Arthur and Claire Vance. They were simple, rural people. They wouldn't wear custom-dyed European silk. He drove back to Elias Vance's home, needing to view the last known photographs of Arthur and Claire, looking for any clue, any link to Silas Holt or the luxury world. Elias, exhausted by Ilara's continued silence, let him into the guest room that served as Ilara's temporary sanctuary. Ilara was asleep in her cot, the red checkered bunny clutched tightly to her chest. Thorne noticed a new detail. The bunny's ear, the one closest to the splinter, was now slightly frayed and torn. The psychological weight of the evidence was literally fraying the child's last comfort object. He sat with Elias, looking at a small stack of family photos Elias had kept from a storage box. Claire Vance was a vibrant, smiling woman. Arthur was kind-eyed, slightly reserved. Nothing suggested a link to wealth or high fashion. "Elias," Thorne said, pointing to a photo of Claire at a birthday party, holding Ilara as a toddler. "Do you remember the photo album that was taken? Do you know what was in it?" Elias rubbed his temples. I think Arthur mentioned it once. It wasn't a normal album. It was a scrapbook. He and Claire kept it since before Ilara was born. He said it was their book of beginnings. Things they couldn't talk about. Pictures from their old life before they came to Vermont. Before they came to Vermont, Thorne repeated, the phrase echoing in the quiet room. Where did they come from? Boston. Like you. They moved up here about 6 years ago, said they needed a change of pace. Arthur took a teaching job. Claire worked from home, doing freelance graphic design. 6 years ago, the exact time Silas Holt's trust purchased the cabin. Arthur and Claire Vance, A Life in Boston, a secret book of beginnings taken by a killer linked to a billionaire. The elements were aligning in a terrifying pattern. The key is in that album, Elias. It wasn't a random target. They were killed because of what was in that book, and the killer took it to erase the evidence of the Vance's past. Thorne knew he had to talk to Silas Holt. But a man like Holt wouldn't just sit for a simple police interview. He'd need leverage. He had the splinter and the silk fiber, physical anchors to Holt's domain. He needed to find the connection, the human link between the quiet Vances and the powerful private billionaire. The rising sense of mystery and impending danger was palpable. Thorne felt the familiar rush of the hunt, but also the deep, unsettling terror that came from confronting wealth and power that believed itself above the law. His final realization of the day struck him like a physical blow. The Vances weren't renting the cabin, they were hiding in it. Thorne couldn't approach Silas Holt directly without a warrant, which the local sheriff would never grant on the basis of a dark wood splinter and a purple thread. And he needed to approach the edge of Holt's world, the people who knew his secrets. His target became Eleanor "Ellie" Hayes, Holt's discreet, long-time executive assistant. Thorne found a former colleague of Ellie's, a now retired secretary named Martha, who lived in a small, well-kept home in Burlington. The weather had turned sharply colder, and the sky was the color of slate. Martha, a nervous woman with sharp, observant eyes, invited Thorne inside. She was initially defensive, wary of any inquiry related to Holt. "Silas Holt is a difficult man, detective," Martha said, offering Thorne weak tea. "Ellie worships him. He took her out of a bad situation, single mother, struggling. She'd never betray him. She's loyal to a fault." "I'm not asking her to betray him, Martha. I'm asking about the Vances, Arthur and Claire. Did Ellie ever mention them, or the cabin they were staying in?" Martha frowned, stirring her tea slowly. "No. Ellie never discussed the holdings. But I remember something strange. About 5 years ago, shortly after Holt bought that place near Pine Ridge, Ellie was incredibly stressed. She told me she was handling a delicate private matter for Mr. Holt, something involving a non-disclosure agreement and a significant ongoing payment. Who was receiving the payment? Thorne pressed, leaning forward. She wouldn't say. She only told me one thing. The matter involved a child, and it was about keeping a secret contained. A child, Ilara. Arthur and Claire Vance hadn't been hiding from Holt. They had been paid by Holt to hide something, and the missing Book of Beginnings held the record of the secret. Thorne thanked Martha and immediately called Elias. "Elias, I need you to search through Ilara's belongings, her parents' stuff, anything you kept. Look for any document, any old check stub, or any formal letter from a legal firm, especially from Silas Holt's company." Elias was reluctant, but understood the gravity. He called back 2 hours later, his voice tight with shock. "Marcus, I found it. Tucked inside Ilara's favorite storybook, Goodnight Moon. It was folded and stuck between the last pages. The document was a single, aged piece of high-quality cream linen paper, bearing the letterhead of Holt's primary legal firm in New York. It wasn't a check stub, but an old, undated, and highly confidential agreement of guardianship. It stated that Arthur and Claire Vance were the designated temporary guardians of an infant named E.H., initials that burned in Thorne's mind. Ilara Holt. The agreement was specific. The Vances were to raise the child in complete isolation, with all contact with the biological father and mother severed, in exchange for a substantial quarterly payment into a trust. The contract was null and void if any attempt was made to contact the biological parents or reveal the child's identity. The biological father's name on the document was redacted. The biological mother's name was also absent. This was a classic, ironclad legal arrangement to bury a mistake. Thorne's mind pieced the puzzle together with sickening clarity. 1. Silas Holt bought the remote cabin specifically to house the Vances and Ilara. 2. The Vances were paid to raise the child, whose original name was likely Ilara Holt. 3. The Book of Beginnings contained the true photographic record of Ilara's birth and her biological mother, evidence the Vances had illegally kept. 4. The killer, linked to Holt and the luxury silk, perhaps the mother or a close associate, came for the book to ensure the secret remained buried forever. The Vances died protecting the secret they'd been paid to keep. The real terror was the chillingly rational and premeditated nature of the crime, shielded by wealth and executed with ruthless precision. He needed to find the biological mother, the woman who wore purple silk and was desperate enough to hire a killer to reclaim or silence her past. The only lead was the initials E.H., if it meant Ilara Holt, and the knowledge that the arrangement was about Silas Holt's mistake. Thorne drove towards Stowe, the snow-dusted, affluent retreat where Silas Holt's main estate was located. The contrast between the isolated, humble Vance cabin and Holt's world of unimaginable wealth was stark. He called Elias one last time. "Elias, I need a picture. The earliest picture you have of Ilara. A baby photo, if possible. Don't tell me why. Just find one and email it to me now." As he drove, the winter sun broke through the clouds, reflecting blindingly off the snow. Thorne knew he was walking into a sophisticated trap. He was a retired cop with a dark wood splinter and a non-disclosure agreement. Against him, a billionaire who had already orchestrated 2 murders to keep his life perfect. The escalating risk of the investigation was about to become personal. Silas Holt's estate, the Pinnacle, sat high on a ridge overlooking Stowe, a modern architectural fortress of glass and dark stone, protected by a long gated driveway. Thorne didn't bother with the main entrance. He parked his worn pickup truck several miles down the road, pulling on his warmest coat and boots, and hiked through the dense, snow-laden woods, using the green mountain terrain he had come to love as his cover. He found a secluded vantage point on a slope overlooking the estate's sprawling back terrace. It was silent, save for the hum of the heating system and the occasional gust of wind. The interior glowed with a subdued, expensive warmth. Thorne pulled out his phone and examined the baby photo Elias had sent. Ilara Vance as an infant, chubby, wide-eyed, lying on a blanket. He zoomed in on her face, then compared it to a public photo he'd pulled up of Silas Holt's adult daughter, Serafina Holt, a prominent New York art curator, known for her sharp features and flawless public image. The resemblance was chilling, not to Silas Holt, but to Serafina. The distinct shape of the eyes, the chin. It was a strong, unshakable familial similarity. Hypothesis: Ilara was Serafina Holt's child, conceived in a youthful mistake or a scandalous affair, and Silas Holt, the patriarch obsessed with image and control, had paid the Vances to take the child and disappear. Thorne called Agent Miller in Boston. "Miller, I need a deep background check on Serafina Holt, specifically anything involving a pregnancy, a year she disappeared from the public eye about 6 years ago. Also, check her financial records for large, regular personal payments that run parallel to the trust's payments to the Vances." "You think the socialite daughter is the killer, Marcus?" Miller asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I think the daughter is the biological mother who lost control of the situation. And I think the killer is someone who acted for her, or with her, to clean up the last piece of evidence, the photo album. Thorne lowered the phone, the cold seeping into his bones. He had to draw Holt out. The key was the album. He knew Holt valued his privacy and control above all else. He hiked back to his truck and drove to the nearest high-end stationery store in Stowe, purchasing a simple black leather-bound photo album, identical in size and feel to the one stolen from the Vances. He then returned to his own home, spending hours in his small, isolated study. He filled the album with blank white pages, then carefully placed a single cropped close-up photo of baby Ilara on the very last page, securing it with tape. He also sealed the dark wood splinter and the silk fiber in a labeled envelope and tucked it deep inside the album's back cover. The plan was crude but direct. He would use the threat of the evidence to force Holt's hand, creating an immediate, non-official confrontation. The next morning, Thorne drove directly to Holt's corporate offices in Burlington, a glass and steel building that felt out of place against the historic New England architecture. He didn't ask for an appointment. He sent the black photo album, marked "Personal and Confidential, the Vance Matter," up with a receptionist. Less than 10 minutes later, his phone rang. The number was blocked. "You have 5 minutes, Detective Thorne." Silas Holt's voice was a low, resonant baritone, cold and precise. "You are trespassing on private property, and I suggest you do not use the Vance name again." "I am on public property, Mr. Holt," Thorne countered, his voice steady. "And I'll use the Vance name until I find out who killed Arthur and Claire. I just sent you a photo album. You'll notice it's empty except for the last page, and a small envelope in the back." A heavy silence stretched across the line, filled only with the faint echo of Holt's controlled breathing. "What do you want?" Holt asked finally, the coldness replaced by a thin, razor-sharp edge of menace. "I want the truth about E.H. I want to know why you paid the Vances to vanish, and what they had in the real album that was worth their lives." "You've clearly misunderstood the nature of my business," Holt sneered. "I don't think so. I understand control. You bought a daughter 6 years ago, and when the original custodians threatened to expose your secret or your daughter's secret, you had them eliminated. I have the guardianship agreement from Ilara's book, the one you missed. I have the Peruvian mahogany splinter from your estate on a child's toy, and I have a silk fiber tied to a European custom order." "The silence is broken, Mr. Holt. I'm taking Ilara to the state authorities with this information if you don't talk to me." "Meet me at my estate. 1 hour. Come alone. If you bring anyone or if you tell anyone about this conversation, your quiet life in Vermont will end very suddenly. You understand?" The threat was a chilling, realistic promise of consequence. Thorne understood perfectly. He was no longer a detective. He was a participant in a high-stakes life-or-death negotiation. He drove toward Stowe, the tension radiating from his hands gripping the steering wheel. The darkness surrounding the murder was not from a ghost or a monster, but from the terrifying indifference of the very powerful. He was alone, but he felt a rising sense of purpose. He was doing this for the silent little girl clinging to her torn bunny. Thorne arrived at the pinnacle exactly on time. The gates swung silently inward, an unsettling invitation. He drove up the winding paved drive lined with meticulously trimmed pines. The house was enormous, a dark silhouette against the white mountainside. He was met at the front door by a tall, impeccably dressed man. Not Holt, but a private security consultant with the dead, watchful eyes of an ex-Special Forces operative. The man patted Thorne down with practiced efficiency, taking his phone and his small legal handgun. He was led into a vast, modern living space. The centerpiece was a long, dark Peruvian mahogany table. Silas Holt stood at the far end, looking out a panoramic window. He was a powerfully built man in his late 50s, his silver hair sharp, his tailored suit a testament to his wealth. "You're a long way from Boston, Thorne," Holt said, turning slowly. His eyes were cold, assessing. "And out of your league. I was a good detective, Mr. Holt. Good enough to know you paid the Vances to vanish with a child who threatened your family's image. I know the child is Ilara Holt, the daughter of your own daughter, Serafina. Holt didn't flinch. The composure was chilling. The Vances were well compensated to be surrogate parents and maintain an ironclad silence. They failed. They broke the non-disclosure agreement by creating that book of beginnings, a photographic record of the child's true parentage. They began to use it as leverage for more money. So you sent someone to retrieve the book. Holt walked to the mahogany table, placing his hands flat on its dark, polished surface. I sent my head of security, Mr. Vance, Arthur's older brother, ironically, to peacefully retrieve the album and remind them of their obligations. He failed to control the situation. Arthur resisted. It became violent. Thorne felt a sudden, sharp jolt of psychological terror. Holt wasn't confessing to murder. He was confessing to ordering the elimination of evidence that resulted in murder. He was creating a layer of plausible deniability. Arthur's brother? He was your security? A family matter, handled by a family member. Holt confirmed, his expression unreadable. It kept things contained. And the dark wood splinter in Ilara's toy? Was that from your head of security's attempt to break the bed to look for the album? A detail of unfortunate collateral damage, Holt dismissed with a wave of his hand. The Vances are dead. The secret is safe. The album is destroyed. The only loose end is you, Thorne, and the incomplete information you possess. You're wrong, Thorne insisted, his voice hardening. There's a second loose end, the purple silk fiber. That wasn't Arthur's brother. That was a woman, an expensive custom-dyed silk. Someone else was there, someone linked to Serafina. Holt's jaw tightened. The composure cracked just a millisecond. He looked away, focusing on the snow outside. I believe your 5 minutes are up, Detective. You have the truth, the acceptable truth. I suggest you take your partial information, your retired status, and go home to your quiet life. I'm not leaving until you tell me about the woman, Thorne stated, holding his ground. The confrontation had become a battle of wills, the stakes the future of a silent child. She was there. She was either the direct killer or the person who orchestrated the violence. The intent was hers. Tell me about the silk. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tense atmosphere. A woman's voice, sharp and cold, emerging from a hidden doorway. He doesn't have to tell you anything, Detective. Serafina Holt stepped into the room. She was even more striking in person, dressed in expensive tailored slacks and a deep purple silk blouse that shimmered under the room's recessed lighting. The color was an exact match for the tiny fiber in the evidence bag. Her face was tight, with a mixture of fear and fury. My father is protecting me. Arthur Vance was threatening to expose me and my daughter, Ilara. The album contained proof of an affair and a pregnancy that would have ruined my career and my father's business. I went there with Arthur's brother to get the book. Thorne looked from the daughter to the father, the pieces clicking into place. The father covered the crime by blaming the brother. The daughter was the one who was truly there, and the one who ultimately directed the action. You were the one who took the album. And you were the one who killed them, weren't you? Thorne asked Serafina, the accusation steady and heavy. Serafina's eyes flashed, but she quickly masked it. It was an accident. They were struggling with Arthur's brother. I was only there for the book. I only wanted my past secured. Thorne knew she was lying about the accident. The precision of the wounds, the focus on the album, the desperate psychological need for silence, it all pointed to a premeditated act of terror designed to eliminate a threat. He was in the lion's den. He needed to leave with the proof of Serafina's presence. He knew Holt's security man was listening. I don't believe you, Serafina, but I have the guardianship agreement with me. It's with a trusted friend. If I don't check in within the next 3 hours, it goes to the state police, along with a statement naming your father, your brother, and you. And I have the physical evidence linking you to the scene, the silk on the child's toy, The splinter from this table. You left a trail. Now tell me the real story of the murder, or I walk out of here and break the silence forever." The air was thick with the chilling smell of fear and power. Thorne's gamble had worked. He had forced the terrifying truth into the light, but now he had to survive the consequences. The mystery was solved, but the danger was just beginning. Serafina Holt stood rigid, her purple silk blouse shimmering, a stark contrast to the cold, dark wood and glass of the room. Her father, Silas, watched her, his face a mask of calculated fury. Thorne had broken the wall of their control. "You won't ruin my life," Serafina hissed, her composure finally shattering. "Not after I spent 6 years building this career, this life, to erase one night's mistake." She began to speak, her voice trembling at first, then gaining a cold, manic clarity. The true sequence of events, a chilling account of ruthless planning and panic, unfolded in the vast, silent room. "My father's security chief, Arthur's brother, Richard Vance, told us the Vances were demanding a final, exorbitant payment, threatening to send the album to a tabloid," Serafina confessed. "The album contained a photo of me, pregnant, with the actual father who was married. The exposure would have destroyed everything. Father was going to send Richard with a briefcase of cash as a final payment, but I couldn't trust them. I needed the book destroyed." Thorne listened, his mind cataloging every detail. The motivation was not passion or random violence, but corporate-level image protection. "So I went with Richard," Serafina continued, twisting her hands. "I wore old clothes, but I didn't change my blouse. It was the night of a gallery event, and I rushed straight from Stowe. When we got to the cabin, Richard went in first. They were waiting. They were scared, but they were determined to get the money. Richard struggled with Arthur in the living room. Claire threw the album across the room, hitting the side table. And then?" Thorne pressed, his eyes locked on hers. "I picked it up. I had a small utility knife in my purse. I meant to just cut the pictures out, but Arthur broke free from Richard and lunged at me. Claire was screaming. I panicked. I slashed them, both of them, just to stop them. It was clumsy, not clean like the report said." Thorne realized the crime was not a professional hit, but a desperate, violent act of self-preservation by a pampered woman, covered up by her powerful father and his security chief. The brutal nature of the wounds was the result of panic and amateur violence. "The gouge in the plaster by the fireplace," Thorne murmured. Richard tried to stop Arthur's lunge, hitting him against the wall, but Serafina was already on them. "We wiped everything down," Serafina admitted, tears finally welling in her eyes, tears not of remorse but of terror for her ruined life. "Richard said it looked like a panicked home invasion. I took the album. We didn't know Alara was hiding under the bed. Richard told me to burn the album immediately. I missed that tiny picture of her on the last page. I just took the album and ran." The psychological impact on 5-year-old Alara. She didn't just witness the murder, she witnessed her biological mother, the woman she didn't know, commit the ultimate betrayal of violence. The silence was her total psychological retreat from an unbearable truth. "Richard Vance is in the wind," Holt stated, stepping forward, his voice a low threat. "He is my problem, Thorne, not yours. You have your confession. You have your truth. What is your price?" "My price is your full, detailed confession, naming Serafina and Richard. You will surrender Serafina to the authorities, and you will pay for Alara's lifelong care and therapy, completely separate from your control." Holt scoffed. "You are an idealistic fool, detective. I control the local law enforcement, and I control my daughter's future. I can make this whole visit disappear, and you with it." The security consultant, the ex-operative, moved silently behind Thorne, his shadow falling over the detective. The danger was immediate and extreme. Thorne had gained the truth, but he hadn't planned a safe exit. "You're wrong, Mr. Holt," Thorne said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline surge. He spoke deliberately, knowing the hidden operative was listening to his exit plan. The guardianship agreement isn't with a friend, it's with Elias Vance, the social worker. He's a man of absolute moral character, and he has a timeline. I told him if I didn't send him the keyword Pine Ridge by noon today, he sends the document straight to the state attorney general's office and a Boston reporter I planted the story with. You kill me now. The world knows everything in 1 hour. It was a total bluff. Elias had no timeline, and the document was still sealed in an envelope in Thorne's truck. But the lie had to be absolute, and the keyword had to sound legitimate. Silas Holt paused, his mind calculating the immense financial and reputational cost of the document hitting the press. The slight hesitation was all Thorne needed. "Get out!" Holt snarled, his voice a tight coil of defeat and murderous rage. "Take your truck and get off my property. You tell your friend to keep that document sealed, or I swear I will hunt you and that social worker down." The security operative stepped back just enough. Thorne walked out of the house, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cold air felt fresh, a reprieve. He drove away, watching the estate in his rearview mirror until the gates closed behind him, a final, chilling symbol of the secret they desperately wanted to keep locked inside. He immediately pulled over, grabbed his phone from the glove compartment and dialed Elias. He needed to get the guardianship agreement into safe, irrefutable hands. Don't let the mystery end here. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the dramatic climax. The silence of the little girl is about to break. Detective Thorne immediately met Elias Vance at a neutral public location, a small, bustling diner in Rutland. He handed the guardianship agreement to Elias, along with a detailed handwritten summary of his meeting with the Holts, including Serafina's chilling confession and Silas Holt's threat. "Elias, you have to take this straight to the state attorney general's office in Montpelier, not the local sheriff. Holt owns the sheriff's department," Thorne instructed, his voice low and intense. "The agreement, Serafina's guilt, the father's cover-up, it all links up. We have to secure Ilara's future and bring them down legally." Elias, pale with shock, gripped the document. "I knew they weren't just renters. I never imagined this level of darkness, Marcus. Her own mother. It was never about motherhood, Elias. It was about image and control. Serafina never saw Ilara as a child, but as a reputational liability." As Elias prepared to leave for Montpelier, Thorne drove to the forensics lab to meet Dr. Sharma. He needed the physical evidence irrefutably documented. He presented the dark wood splinter and the purple silk fiber for final analysis, ensuring the report detailed the Peruvian mahogany match to the Holt estate and the custom dye lot of the silk fiber. "This evidence is crucial, Lena," Thorne stressed. "It places Serafina Holt at the scene. It's the anchor that confirms her confession." Dr. Sharma, seeing the weight of the investigation in Thorne's eyes, worked with meticulous precision, generating a comprehensive report detailing the physical links between the evidence and Serafina Holt's world. Meanwhile, in Montpelier, Elias successfully delivered the file to a senior deputy attorney general, Sarah Chen, a fiercely independent prosecutor with a reputation for taking on powerful interests. The guardianship agreement, which negated the home invasion theory and established the child's true identity, was the legal keystone. The next few days were a blur of coordinated action. The Attorney General's office moved with speed and secrecy, leveraging the forensic report and the guardianship agreement to obtain a sealed warrant for Serafina Holt's arrest, bypassing the local Rutland Sheriff's jurisdiction entirely. The local media, tipped off by Thorne's Boston contact, began to run quiet, subtle pieces on the re-examination of the 6-month-old Vance murder, creating public pressure. The psychological impact on Ilara during this period was the most critical concern. With the legal net closing, Thorne returned to Ilara, knowing the time was approaching for the ultimate, devastating truth to be revealed to her, or for her to find her own voice. He sat with her in the sunroom, the winter light streaming in. Ilara was drawing again. She had moved past the red scribbling. Now she was drawing two figures, a large figure, her father Arthur, and a smaller figure, herself. The large figure had a huge, exaggerated mouth, but it was filled with black ink. The small figure, Ilara, had no mouth at all. The silence was not just a symptom, it was a deliberate act of psychological self-censorship. She saw her parents screaming their final protest, and she chose to silence herself to survive the trauma. Thorne decided to try a different approach, one that didn't demand speech, but offered solidarity. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to draw. He drew a small, red-checkered bunny. Then he drew a tiny, dark wood splinter on the floor next to it, and he drew the heavy snow covering everything. Ilara watched him. Her eyes, usually empty, showed a glimmer of attention. He then drew a large, beautiful tree, the Green Mountains, the symbol of Vermont, and he drew a tiny, clear path leading away from the heavy snow. He looked at her and spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Ilara, the bad people are being caught. They can't hurt you anymore. They can't take your pictures or your memories. The silence kept you safe, but you don't need it now. You have people who love you. He didn't pressure her. He simply sat there, his presence a calm, unyielding pillar against the storm of her trauma. At that moment, his phone vibrated with a message from Elias. Serafina Holt is in custody. They are charging her with first-degree murder. Silas is being charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. The net held. Thorne looked at Ilara, whose gaze had now drifted from the drawing to the window. The cold, heavy winter had finally yielded. The sun was out, bright and unmoving. He saw her small hand move. She didn't draw. She reached out and touched the mouthless figure on her paper. Then, in an almost imperceptible movement, she traced the outline of a small, curved smile with her fingertip. The silence had endured the terror, but the hope for recovery had just begun. The legal and emotional resolution had finally created the space for the child's mind to begin healing. The horror was over, but the road to recovery was just starting. The fallout from the Holt arrests was seismic, shaking the foundations of wealth and power in Vermont and New England. Serafina Holt's arrest was national news, a stark headline contrasting the glamorous socialite with the brutal murder charges. Silas Holt's subsequent detention for obstruction confirmed the extent of the cover-up. The sheer volume of evidence, the guardianship agreement, the financial paper trail, Serafina's own silk fiber, and the Peruvian mahogany splinter made the legal case ironclad. For Ilara, the external storm brought a profound, necessary calm. She was immediately placed in the secure, temporary custody of Elias Vance, a man she trusted and who had been vetted by the State Attorney General's office. Elias and a specialized child trauma therapist, Dr. Ann Kessler, worked together to create a sanctuary for Ilara. Thorne remained a constant, steady presence, the one figure who had successfully navigated the dark secret and brought the truth to light. He visited Ilara daily, not as a detective, but as a quiet companion. The therapy focused on non-verbal communication and processing the trauma. Dr. Kessler used play acting and drawing, giving Ilara permission to express the horror without the pressure of speech. Ilara's drawings slowly evolved. The black shapes became smaller, the red crayon faded, and she began to incorporate the colors of the outside world, the green of the mountains, the bright blue of the summer sky she remembered. One afternoon, almost 2 months after the arrests, Ilara was playing with a set of wooden blocks, building a small, intricate structure. Thorne was watching from a chair nearby, sipping coffee. Elias walked into the room, holding the red-checkered bunny that Ilara had been separated from for deep cleaning and repair. The torn ear had been neatly stitched. He knelt down beside Ilara's blocks. "Look, Ilara," Elias said softly. "Bunny is all better now. All fixed up." Ilara looked at the bunny. She reached out and gently took it. She held the bunny for a long moment, tracing the stitched ear, the spot where the dark wood splinter had been trapped. The memory, Thorne knew, was coming back to her. Not as a terrifying flash, but as a manageable truth. She looked up at Elias, then at Thorne, her clear blue eyes deep and searching. Her gaze finally settled on the structure of blocks, a small, four-sided house she had just finished. She wanted the bunny inside it. Ilara tried to push the bunny through the narrow doorway of the blockhouse, but the toy was too large. Her little brow furrowed in concentration. She tried again, forcing it. Suddenly a small, quiet, husky sound emerged from her throat, the first sound in 8 months. It was a frustrated, almost silent huff. Then she spoke, her voice a thin, rusty thread, the words simple and focused on the immediate problem. Won't fit. Elias and Thorne froze. The silence was broken. The words were simple, functional, and anchored in the present. Elias sank to his knees, his eyes welling up with tears of relief. He didn't rush her or overwhelm her. "You're right, sweetheart," he whispered. "It won't fit." Ilara looked at him, then at Thorne. Her face for the first time showed a flicker of normal, childish frustration, not terror. Thorne, maintaining his steady composure, nodded slightly. "The door is too small, Ilara. We can make a bigger door." He reached out and, with gentle care, moved 2 of the wooden blocks, making the opening wider. Ilara watched, then carefully pushed the bunny through the new, larger opening. She looked back up at Thorne, and this time there was a small, genuine smile. The broken silence was not a dramatic burst of memory or confession. It was a quiet, functional release, a signal that the inner machinery of her mind had resumed normal operation. She had chosen to speak because the immediate, tangible danger was gone, replaced by the secure presence of the people who loved her. The trauma was still there, but the psychological barrier she had built for survival had finally been lowered. The terrifying chapter of the Vance murders was closed. The healing, slow and painstaking, had begun. Thorne knew his work was complete. He had solved the mystery, dismantled the cover-up, and most importantly, given a silent little girl the chance to find her voice again, not by demanding the truth, but by providing a secure, realistic path back to a safe world. The trial of Serafina Holt and the proceedings against Silas Holt dominated the news cycle for months. Serafina was convicted of murder, her confession and the irrefutable forensic evidence, the purple silk fiber and the Peruvian mahogany splinter, sealing her fate. Silas Holt, despite his vast legal resources, was found guilty of conspiracy and obstruction. The rich, powerful family had finally been held accountable, a rare and deeply satisfying conclusion for Thorne. With the legal resolution secure, Thorne decided it was time to leave. He had come to Vermont seeking quiet, and instead, he had found a deeply personal and dangerous investigation that brought him face to face with the true nature of human darkness. But he had also found purpose and had formed an unbreakable bond with Elias Vance, and most importantly, with Ilara. Thorne stood on the porch of Elias Vance's home, the sun setting over the green mountains. It was early spring, and the last patches of dirty snow were finally melting, revealing the fresh, dark earth beneath. The air smelled of wet pine and coming rain. Elias stepped out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "She said my name today, Marcus. Just once. Elias. Like she was trying it out." "It's a start," Thorne said, taking the coffee. "She's strong, Elias. She had to be to survive that." "You did that, Marcus. You broke the silence. You showed her that the truth could be safer than the hiding." "We did it, Elias. You gave me the initial faith in the child. Lena gave me the forensics. The Attorney General gave us the muscle. You gave Ilara the stability." Thorne paused, looking out at the mountains. "I'm heading north tomorrow, up past Stowe. I bought a small cabin. Even quieter than this one." Elias nodded, understanding. Thorne needed the solitude to process the trauma of the case, a trauma that mirrored some of his own from his Boston past. "She drew this for you," Elias said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Thorne opened the drawing. It was simple, colorful, and hopeful. It showed two figures, Thorne and Elias, standing side by side, holding hands, looking at a house that had a large, welcoming door. The sun was a bright, happy yellow circle, and in the corner of the paper there was a small, detailed drawing of the red checkered bunny, its ear perfectly stitched. Thorne felt a warmth spread through him that no amount of coffee could provide. The drawing was her expression of gratitude, and the ultimate sign of her psychological recovery. "She asked me something this morning, Marcus," Elias said quietly, watching Thorne's reaction to the drawing. "She asked me, 'Where are the pictures now?'" Thorne looked up, his eyes meeting Elias's. "The stolen album, the book of beginnings. Yes, she remembers. She remembers it being taken but not being destroyed. She still feels the loss of her parents' history." Thorne remembered Serafina's statement. "Richard told me to burn the album immediately. I just took the album and ran. But did she burn it? A panicked amateur killer might have hidden it instead of taking the time to destroy it completely." "The album wasn't destroyed," Thorne said, a conviction hardening his voice. "I don't believe her. Serafina ran. She was desperate to get out. It's hidden near the cabin. Richard Vance's problem was cover-up. Serafina's problem was possession. This was the final, small, realistic piece of the puzzle. The book, the memories, was still out there. Thorne knew he wouldn't pursue it. His work was done. His role was to dismantle the terror, not to recover every last piece of evidence. That was a job for the police, now that the case was reopened. But he shared the final, logical deduction with Elias, closing the final loop of the suspense and mystery. "Richard Vance, the head of security, is still missing," Thorne stated, a final chilling reminder of the loose end. "He's the only one who knows where she might have hidden it. But he won't be a threat to Alara. His life is ruined. He's hiding from Holt's wrath and the state's warrant. He's a ghost now." Thorne finished his coffee. He looked at the drawing one last time, taking the image of the happy house and the smiling sun with him. He said goodbye to Elias, a deep, silent acknowledgement of their shared burden and triumph. He walked to his truck. As he drove away, he looked back at the house. In the window, he saw a small figure, Alara, waving. She wasn't silent anymore. The terror had been overcome by the simple, enduring power of human connection and the pursuit of the unvarnished truth. The silence was broken, and the child of Vermont was finally free to speak.